The Neon Mirage Casino shimmered like a jewel in the heart of a desert city, a glittering palace of high stakes and hidden secrets. Under the cascade of neon lights and the constant hum of slot machines, a drama was unfolding that would soon shatter the illusion of glamour and reveal the dark underbelly of power and money. It began on a humid summer night, when the casino's exclusive high roller lounge, reserved for the city's elite gamblers and influential investors, became the stage for a murder that would ripple through every corner of the establishment. At precisely 2:17 a.m., amidst the low murmur of whispered bets and the clink of fine crystal glasses, the lifeless body of Malcolm Pierce was discovered slumped over a mahogany table in the private VIP area. Pierce, a suave and well-respected figure in both the gambling world and the world of high finance, had been known for his daring bets and his knack for turning risk into reward. His crisp tailored suit now stained with blood, and the disarray of documents scattered across the table told a tale of a violent encounter in which his final moments were spent desperately clutching a single half-burned note that read, "In the neon shadows, truth dies silently." Detective Carla Monroe arrived on the scene with an air of quiet determination. A veteran of the city's homicide unit, she had seen her share of brutal crimes, but nothing in the opulent confines of a casino had ever struck her quite like this. The VIP lounge was cordoned off in yellow tape, and uniformed officers methodically secured every corner. Monroe's experienced eyes took in every detail: the slight tilt of Pierce's head as if he had been caught off guard, the pristine condition of the surrounding decor juxtaposed with the chaos of scattered papers and spilled bourbon, and the absence of any signs of forced entry. It was as if the killer had not only known exactly where to strike, but had also meticulously planned every detail to ensure that nothing else in the room was disturbed. Interviews with witnesses began almost immediately. The lounge had been populated by an assortment of high-profile gamblers, investors, and local dignitaries, figures who prided themselves on their discretion. Most were reluctant to speak, their eyes darting nervously as they recalled vague details of the evening. One nervous accountant, who had been seated a few tables away, recalled overhearing a hushed argument between Pierce and an unknown man in a dark suit. "There was tension," he murmured, like they were settling an old score. "I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard something about debts and betrayals." Another patron, a middle-aged woman with an impeccable diamond necklace, insisted that she had seen Pierce receiving a mysterious envelope from a man whose face was partly concealed by the brim of a hat. Yet no one could offer a complete description of the suspect, and the anonymity of the casino's elite clientele only deepened the mystery. As Detective Monroe began her investigation, she quickly discovered that Malcolm Pierce's life was far more complex than the polished image he presented to the world. Born into a modest family, Pierce had clawed his way to the top of the high-stakes gambling scene, forging alliances with influential figures in both the business and criminal worlds. Financial records obtained from a confidential source revealed that over the past several years, Pierce had been involved in a series of questionable transactions, money laundering schemes, off-the-book investments, and secret deals that linked his gambling profits to offshore accounts. In the days leading up to his murder, he had been particularly secretive, spending long hours in his private office at the casino, poring over documents and making frantic phone calls that he would later regret. A close associate later confided that Pierce had been planning to expose a major financial scandal involving several high-ranking executives at the Neon Mirage, a move that would have threatened not only his personal fortune but the delicate balance of power within the casino's management. One piece of evidence, in particular, caught Monroe's attention: a series of encrypted emails found on Pierce's personal tablet. With the assistance of a trusted cyber forensic specialist, she painstakingly decrypted portions of the correspondence. The emails hinted at a clandestine meeting scheduled for the night of the murder, a meeting that was meant to finalize a deal that could have shifted millions of dollars from one shadowy entity to another. One email, its language terse and laden with urgency, read, "Midnight rendezvous. All debts must be cleared. No one can know." The implications were chilling. It suggested that Pierce had been on the verge of a major financial coup, one that would have unmasked long-held secrets about the flow of illicit money through the casino. The investigation soon revealed that behind the opulent facade of the Neon Mirage lay a network of corruption and betrayal that extended far beyond the gaming floor. Among the suspects was Victor Vic Santoro, a notorious enforcer with a reputation for settling scores in the criminal underworld. Santoro was known to operate as a fixer for several high-powered figures in the casino's management, and whispers in the corridors of power hinted that he had been seen in the vicinity of the High Roller Lounge on that fateful night. Surveillance footage from the casino's security system, though grainy, revealed a dark silhouette moving briskly along a corridor adjacent to the VIP area. While the footage did not provide a clear view of the face, the distinctive gait and the manner of movement bore an eerie resemblance to Santoro's known mannerisms. At the same time, Detective Monroe uncovered damning evidence from the casino's internal audit. Financial discrepancies had been noted in recent months, irregularities that pointed to money being siphoned off into anonymous accounts. One particularly incriminating ledger showed a series of large withdrawals from the casino's coffers, all recorded under the name Eclipse Investments. Further investigation revealed that Eclipse Investments was a shell company with ties to several prominent figures in the city's financial circles, including some who were regular patrons of the Neon Mirage. The auditor's report noted that these transactions lacked proper documentation and had been approved by none other than Richard Pierce himself. The revelation that Pierce had been complicit in such illicit dealings added a layer of tragic irony to his murder. It appeared that his fall from grace might have been imminent even before the fatal night. As the layers of the investigation unfolded, Detective Monroe's path began to converge on a figure whose identity had been shrouded in mystery, the man in the dark suit. Monroe's team traced the suspect through a series of transactions and phone records, eventually linking him to a mid-level executive at Eclipse Investments known only as Derek Vance. Vance had been seen at several high-profile events at the Neon Mirage, and his polished demeanor and sharp business acumen had earned him a reputation as a rising star in the city's financial sector. However, further scrutiny of his background revealed troubling connections to organized crime. Witnesses reported that Vance had been involved in heated confrontations with other executives, and there were unconfirmed rumors that he had ties to both local mob figures and international money launderers. The pieces were beginning to fit together: Pierce's discovery of financial irregularities, the encrypted emails, the anonymous tip about a midnight meeting, and now the possibility that Derek Vance, working in cahoots with Victor Santoro, had motives to silence Pierce permanently. Late one rain-soaked night, as Monroe sat in her cluttered office, reviewing pages of transcripts and digital evidence, she received a call from an unexpected source, a former casino dealer named Jasmine Ortiz. Jasmine had worked at the Neon Mirage for over a decade, and was known for her keen observational skills and her ability to recall even the smallest details. In a hushed and trembling voice, she revealed that on the night of the murder, she had witnessed a discreet exchange in one of the back corridors of the High Roller Lounge. "I saw him," she whispered, referring to a man in a dark suit, handing something over to a tall, heavy-set man, who looked like one of those muscle-bound guys. They didn't speak, just nodded. "I didn't know what it was, a folder maybe, but I could tell it was important." Jasmine's testimony, though vague, lent further credence to the theory that a secret meeting had taken place, and that the key to unlocking the conspiracy lay in identifying the participants. Determined to follow this lead, Detective Monroe arranged a covert operation to monitor the back corridors of the Neon Mirage. For several nights, plainclothes officers shadowed the corridors, watching for any unusual activity. Their persistence paid off when, on a particularly stormy evening, they observed a man matching the description of Derek Vance slipping into a restricted area adjacent to the High Roller Lounge. Security cameras captured the fleeting image, and forensic experts later recovered a partial fingerprint from a discarded coffee cup left near the corridor's entrance. The fingerprint was eventually matched to Vance, cementing his presence at the scene on the night of the murder. With mounting evidence against him, Derek Vance was brought in for questioning. In a stark fluorescent-lit interrogation room, Vance maintained a veneer of cool detachment as Detective Monroe pressed him with a barrage of questions. His initial denials grew increasingly strained when confronted with the encrypted emails, the financial records implicating Eclipse Investments, and the testimony of witnesses like Jasmine Ortiz. Finally, under the relentless pressure of the evidence, Vance's composure began to crumble. In a measured, almost resigned tone, He admitted that he had been involved in a deal with certain investors to restructure the casino's finances, a deal that involved moving large sums of money into offshore accounts to cover up losses from risky ventures. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," he insisted, his eyes darting nervously. Malcolm's discovery threatened to blow everything wide open. He was going to expose us, and that would have meant ruin for many of us. "I only wanted to keep the situation under control." His words, though couched in justification, confirmed what Monroe had long suspected, that the murder of Malcolm Pierce was a calculated act, designed to prevent the unraveling of a complex financial web that reached into the highest echelons of both the casino and the city's business elite. In the days that followed Vance's confession, Detective Monroe and her team worked tirelessly to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy. Additional arrests were made, including that of Victor Santoro, whose reputation as a ruthless enforcer had long made him a prime suspect in several unsolved cases. Financial records, decrypted communications, and forensic evidence all painted a damning picture of collusion between key figures at the Neon Mirage and a network of criminal financiers. The evidence revealed that the murder had been orchestrated to coincide with a critical moment in a multi-million-dollar deal, a deal that, if exposed, would have led to the collapse of several interlocking financial schemes. As the case moved toward trial, the public reaction was one of shock and disbelief. Headlines in every major newspaper decried the corruption lurking behind the casino's glittering facade, and citizens demanded that those responsible be held accountable. In the courtroom, testimonies from former employees, expert forensic analysts, and even other high-roller patrons converged to expose the layers of deceit. The trial was a grueling, months-long process, with each witness adding a piece to the mosaic of greed, betrayal, and violence that had culminated in Malcolm Pierce's murder. In a dramatic moment during the trial, a key piece of evidence was presented: the partially burned note found in Pierce's hand. Forensic experts testified that the note had been deliberately set on fire to obscure its contents, yet enough remained to reveal its ominous message. The phrase "in the neon shadows, truth dies silently" became a rallying cry for those who had suffered under the weight of the conspiracy, symbolizing not only the loss of one man's life, but also the erosion of trust in an institution once revered as a beacon of entertainment and prosperity. As verdicts were eventually rendered and sentences handed down, Detective Carla Monroe remained a steadfast figure, both celebrated and somber in her resolve. The Neon Mirage Casino was forced to close its doors temporarily, pending a full audit and a sweeping internal restructuring. High-ranking executives were indicted, and the scandal sent ripples through the corridors of power in the city. Yet even as the legal machinery churned and the public demanded reform, Monroe couldn't shake the lingering sadness that haunted her every step. She often revisited the quiet aftermath of that stormy night, recalling the precise moment when Malcolm Pierce's life was extinguished amid the glimmering neon, a moment that had forever altered the course of many lives. In the months and years that followed, the fallout from the case reshaped the city's approach to corporate oversight and financial transparency. Independent regulatory bodies were established to scrutinize the activities of casinos and other high-stakes enterprises, and stringent measures were enacted to ensure that financial records were kept under rigorous review. The scandal also spurred a wave of investigative journalism, with reporters delving into the murky intersections of legitimate business and organized crime. Documentaries, articles, and public forums dissected every facet of the case, ensuring that the story of Malcolm Pierce's murder, and the dark conspiracy behind it, would never be forgotten. For Detective Monroe, the case became both a professional milestone and a personal burden. Late at night, as she sat alone in her modest apartment overlooking the city lights, she would replay the details in her mind: the furtive glances, the encrypted messages, the cold finality of a life cut short. She found solace in the knowledge that every step she had taken had been in service of truth, that even in a world where neon lights obscured harsh realities, justice had ultimately prevailed. And though the scars of that turbulent time would never fully fade, they served as a constant reminder that the pursuit of truth, however perilous, was a mission worth every sacrifice. The legacy of the Neon Mirage case resonated throughout the city, a stark reminder that behind every dazzling display of wealth and glamour, there could be a hidden world of corruption waiting to be exposed. For every person who had lost their faith in the system, there emerged a renewed call for accountability, a call that echoed in boardrooms, courtrooms, and even the quiet corners of late-night diners. And as new generations of investigators, journalists, and citizens took up the mantle of transparency, the memory of Malcolm Pierce's relentless quest for truth inspired them to continue the fight against the pervasive shadows of greed and deceit. In the end, the story of the Neon Mirage Casino was not just about a single murder. It was a mirror reflecting the complex interplay of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal that defines human nature. It underscored the eternal truth that while the brightest neon lights may dazzle the eye, they also cast the deepest shadows, and within those shadows, secrets may lie waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to seek them. Detective Carla Monroe's journey through the labyrinth of financial corruption and organized crime became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in a world seemingly defined by illusion, truth remains an indomitable force. And so, as the city moved forward, forever altered by the revelations of that fateful night, one thing remained clear: the pursuit of justice was a never-ending quest, one that demanded courage, perseverance, and an unwavering belief that every secret, no matter how deeply buried, would one day see the light of day. In the neon glow of a transformed skyline, and in the collective memory of a community determined to rebuild, the legacy of Malcolm Pierce and the sacrifices made in his name would continue to inspire the quest for truth, ensuring that even amid the glittering allure of wealth and power, integrity would prevail. Under a sky heavy with storm clouds, the Crestwood Transit Hub pulsed with restless energy in the pre-dawn gloom. Every night, the sprawling bus terminal, an architectural maze of high arched ceilings, flickering neon signs, and echoes of hurried footsteps, served as the lifeline for thousands of commuters. But on this fateful night, amid the clamor of departing buses and the low murmur of whispered conversations, a sinister secret was about to shatter the veneer of routine. It began with the discovery of a body in a deserted corner behind a row of grimy ticket kiosks. Late-shift security guard Manuel Ortiz was making his customary rounds when his flashlight beam fell upon a crumpled figure lying near a battered service door. The victim, identified as Julian Reyes, a 28-year-old man with earnest eyes and a messenger bag slung carelessly over his shoulder, lay motionless on the cold concrete floor. A dark stain, spreading like an insidious bruise, marred his shirt, and his face was frozen in an expression of abject shock. Clutched in his hand was a torn scrap of paper bearing the cryptic message, "Truth hides in the shadows of betrayal." In that moment, the hum of the terminal fell away, replaced by an eerie silence punctuated only by the distant rumble of arriving buses and the relentless drip of rainwater from a leaky roof. Detective Sabrina Reyes arrived on the scene just as dawn struggled to break through the oppressive clouds. Known for her unwavering determination and intuitive knack for reading hidden clues, she immediately sensed that Julian's death was no random act of violence. With measured steps, she cordoned off the area and began her initial sweep. The scene was disturbingly neat, no signs of a struggle, no obvious evidence of robbery. The service door was unlocked, and the nearby passage was undisturbed, except for a scattering of crumpled receipts and a lone black glove. Every detail seemed meticulously arranged, as if the killer had taken care to leave behind only the barest fragments of a message. In the sterile light of the early morning, Sabrina interviewed Manuel Ortiz, whose trembling voice betrayed the shock he felt. "I'd seen strange things before, but nothing like this," he confessed, his eyes darting nervously as if expecting the specter of the perpetrator to materialize at any moment. "I remember Julian talking to someone on his phone in a hushed tone just before I found him. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded urgent, like he was warning someone." Ortiz's testimony hinted at a clandestine conversation, a thread that Sabrina vowed to follow. Back at her temporary command post in a rented office overlooking the terminal's busy concourse, Detective Reyes pored over the evidence. Security footage from the terminal's aging cameras offered only grainy glimpses, a shadowy figure in a dark jacket moving purposefully near the scene, and an almost imperceptible flash of a badge on a passerby. Yet one detail caught her attention. In one frame, a figure with a familiar gait appeared to exchange a briefcase with an unknown individual near a dimly lit corridor. The detective's pulse quickened as she recognized that this fleeting interaction might be connected to Julian's final moments. Julian Reyes, as Sabrina soon discovered from his sparse personal effects and digital traces on his smartphone, was not a random drifter but a freelance investigative journalist. In hastily deleted notes and encrypted emails recovered from his device, he had been probing a story that reached deep into the underbelly of Crestwood's urban transit system. Julian had been investigating whispers of corruption within the transit authority, a labyrinthine network of kickbacks, forged contracts, and clandestine deals designed to siphon millions from public funds. His notes mentioned obscure names, suspicious financial transfers, and references to a Project Midnight, a code phrase that appeared repeatedly alongside mentions of the truth and sacrifice. As Detective Reyes followed Julian's digital breadcrumbs, she learned that he had recently met with an anonymous source who claimed to have evidence implicating high-ranking officials in a massive money laundering scheme. The source, signing off only as Raven, had warned Julian that exposing the truth would put him in mortal danger. Julian's final messages, interlaced with urgency and desperation, hinted that he had uncovered something big, something that powerful individuals would stop at nothing to keep hidden. Over the next several days, the investigation unfolded like a dark tapestry of secrets and half-truths. Sabrina Reyes and her team painstakingly collected witness statements from the diverse array of people who frequented the Crestwood Transit Hub. Homeless individuals huddled in doorways, vendors selling steaming cups of coffee, and tired commuters all offered fragments of recollection. One street vendor recalled a heated exchange between two suited men near the terminal's entrance, while a regular night shift bus driver mentioned that Julian had been seen arguing on his phone with someone whose voice was distorted, as if deliberately masked. Clues from the scene began to point toward a connection between the transit hub and an illicit financial network. The black glove found near the body was later sent for forensic analysis, and its unique weave was matched to a custom-made pair known to be commissioned by an exclusive security firm. Meanwhile, the torn scrap of paper bore faint fingerprints that, when run through the lab's database, hinted at a possible connection to a mid-level executive in the transit authority, one Marcus Ellison, a name that until now had flown under the radar in the corridors of power. Marcus, it turned out, had recently been involved in several controversial transactions. Discrepancies in financial reports had been noted by internal auditors, though nothing had ever been conclusively proven. As the layers of corruption began to emerge, Detective Reyes was forced to confront a broader narrative. Julian Reyes's murder was not an isolated tragedy. It was a calculated act designed to silence a voice that threatened to expose the hidden machinations behind Crestwood's public transit system. His investigation had brushed against a nexus of criminality that extended from the city's most downtrodden neighborhoods to the polished offices of its municipal leaders. The evidence pointed to an elaborate conspiracy in which lucrative contracts, covert partnerships with private security firms, and offshore bank accounts all played a part. Every document recovered from Julian's phone, every intercepted email, added to the mounting case that powerful figures were colluding to embezzle public funds while keeping their actions shrouded in secrecy. Amid mounting evidence, Sabrina Reyes arranged a discreet meeting with a former transit employee who had been forced into early retirement under mysterious circumstances. Known only as Sam, the man recounted in a hushed tone how over the years he had noticed odd discrepancies in the maintenance logs and the allocation of repair funds for the terminal. They would reassign budgets and shift numbers, Sam whispered, his voice trembling with regret. I tried to bring it up, but no one wanted to hear it. There was always someone higher up covering for them. Sam's testimony not only corroborated the financial irregularities Julian had been investigating, but also suggested that there was an institutional effort to silence any dissent. The revelation that a network of officials was actively involved in concealing corruption sent shockwaves through the investigation. At the same time, digital forensics uncovered a trove of encrypted files on Julian's laptop that had been meticulously hidden behind layers of password protection. With the help of a cybersecurity expert, Detective Reyes managed to decrypt portions of these files. Within them were detailed spreadsheets showing irregular financial transfers, internal memos referencing Project Midnight, and a series of ominous warnings written in hurried script. One particularly damning email, sent from an untraceable burner account, read, "If the truth sees daylight, the cost will be paid in blood." The stark finality of those words sent a chill through the investigative team, confirming that those who orchestrated the conspiracy were willing to resort to murder. As pressure mounted on the Transit Authority, Detective Reyes found herself facing increasing resistance from within. High-ranking officials, alarmed by the growing scrutiny, began to close ranks. Anonymous threats were delivered to her office, a single envelope containing a photo of a familiar city skyline and the words, "Back off now," scrawled in red. Even her trusted partner, Detective Aaron Pierce, began to show signs of unease. His once steady confidence was now marred by furtive glances and cryptic messages that suggested he too might be under pressure from unseen forces. Yet despite the threats, Reyes pressed on, driven by the memory of Julian's determined eyes and the silent promise he had left behind to expose the truth. Late one night, while reviewing the case files in the dim glow of her office lamp, Sabrina Reyes received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end, modulated and cautious, identified itself only as Raven, in halting, measured tones. Raven claimed to possess evidence that could definitively link Marcus Ellison, a mid-level transit official implicated by the fingerprint on the glove, to the conspiracy. Raven urged Reyes to meet in a secluded parking garage on the outskirts of the city, where the anonymity of darkness would provide cover. Torn between skepticism and the desperate need for further leads, Reyes agreed, instructing her partner to discreetly follow her without making their presence known. In the cavernous shadows of the deserted garage, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of a malfunctioning overhead light, Reyes encountered a nervous young woman clutching a small envelope. The woman introduced herself as Leela, a former administrative assistant at the Transit Authority, who had been forced out for raising too many questions. With trembling hands, she handed over the envelope, which contained scanned copies of internal emails, confidential financial reports, and a photograph of Marcus Ellison entering a secure meeting room on the night of Julian's murder. Leela's voice quavered as she recounted how she had witnessed a clandestine exchange between Ellison and a man in a tailored suit, a man whose face was partially obscured by shadows, but whose bearing exuded cold authority. "I was scared," Leela whispered. "I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't prove anything. Now I just hope this can help stop the madness." Armed with this new evidence, Detective Reyes brought Marcus Ellison in for questioning. In a stark interrogation room that reeked of antiseptic and tension, Ellison maintained a calm, measured tone as he denied any wrongdoing. Yet under Reyes's relentless scrutiny, cracks began to appear in his carefully constructed story. His alibi for the night of the murder was riddled with inconsistencies, and forensic analysis confirmed that his fingerprints were not only on the glove found at the scene, but also on several documents later discovered in a locked cabinet within the Transit Authority's administrative offices. The mounting pressure forced Ellison to finally admit that he had been involved in reassigning funds, an action he claimed was done under orders from higher-ups, but he adamantly denied any connection to Julian Reyes's death. His evasive responses only deepened the mystery and confirmed what Reyes had long suspected: Ellison was a cog in a much larger, deeply corrupt machine. With the net tightening around the conspirators, the investigation began to unravel a complex tapestry of greed, betrayal, and silence. Detective Reyes and her team uncovered that Project Midnight was not merely a code name but a systematic effort to reallocate millions from public transit budgets into private accounts controlled by a clandestine syndicate. This syndicate, comprised of corrupt officials, organized crime figures, and unscrupulous businessmen, had orchestrated a series of shell companies and forged contracts that allowed them to embezzle funds with impunity. Julian Reyes had stumbled upon this web of deceit, and his murder was a desperate bid by the conspirators to extinguish the one voice that threatened to expose their operations. In a dramatic series of raids coordinated with federal agents, investigators targeted several key locations across the city. Offices linked to the Transit Authority, warehouses used for storing forged documents, and even private residences, believed to be safe houses for members of the syndicate, were swept clean of incriminating evidence. One raid on a nondescript building in the industrial district yielded a cache of encrypted hard drives, stacks of bank statements, and a ledger detailing transfers to offshore accounts in tax havens. The evidence was overwhelming, and as the press caught wind of the unfolding scandal, the city's facade of order began to crumble. Public outcry was swift and fierce. The media, once dismissive of Julian Reyes's earlier investigations, now lauded him as a martyr, a brave soul who had paid the ultimate price for his pursuit of truth. Protesters gathered outside City Hall and the Transit Authority's headquarters, demanding accountability and sweeping reforms. In the courtroom, during a marathon trial that stretched over weeks, testimonies from whistleblowers, forensic experts, and former employees painted a damning portrait of systemic corruption. The figure of Marcus Ellison, once a faceless bureaucrat, became emblematic of a deep-rooted betrayal of public trust. His eventual conviction, along with that of several high-ranking officials and criminal intermediaries, sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. Yet for Detective Sabrina Reyes, the case remained an unhealed wound, a reminder that even as justice was dispensed, the scars of corruption would linger. In the quiet hours after the trial, she often found herself revisiting the now quiet corridors of the Crestwood Transit Hub. The terminal, once a bustling artery of urban life, had become a symbol of the lengths to which those in power would go to silence dissent. Every squeak of a worn floor tile, and every echo in the vast, empty spaces, stirred memories of the night Julian Reyes was murdered, memories of determination, betrayal, and a call for truth that had resonated far beyond the confines of a decaying bus terminal. In the months that followed, sweeping reforms were implemented across the transit authority and municipal government. New oversight committees were established, independent audits were mandated, and public access to financial records was dramatically increased. The scandal, once a closely guarded secret among the elite, became a catalyst for a broader movement for transparency and accountability. Investigative journalists, emboldened by the revelations, continued to probe the murky intersections of public funding and private gain, ensuring that the legacy of Julian Reyes's sacrifice would not be forgotten. Detective Reyes, despite the accolades and the visible improvements in the system, remained vigilant. Late nights found her poring over reams of case files and declassified documents, determined to unearth any lingering threads of the syndicate's operations. Her partnership with Detective Aaron Pierce, once strained by the pressures of the case, gradually deepened into a bond forged in shared adversity. Together they pursued leads that took them deep into the underbelly of the city, from seedy back alleys and rundown motels to the opulent boardrooms of corporate power. Each new discovery reinforced the hard truth that corruption, like a cancer, could infiltrate even the most venerable institutions. One crisp winter morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the lingering fog over Crestwood, Reyes received a sealed envelope at her desk. The envelope bore no return address, only her name in a neat, precise script. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed and unsigned, which read, "For every secret unearthed, a new one is born. The truth you seek lies where the past meets the present." Along with the note was a faded photograph of a group of people standing in front of an old transit building, a building that, according to public records, had been demolished years ago. Intrigued and unsettled by the message, Reyes embarked on a new line of inquiry, delving into historical archives and old blueprints. Her research revealed that the demolished building had once served as the headquarters of an early transit company that had been embroiled in scandal decades before. The building's records contained references to Project Legacy, a predecessor to the modern corruption scheme that now haunted Crestwood. It became increasingly clear that the conspiracies of the past had never truly been laid to rest. They had simply evolved, adapting to new technologies and new power structures. As Detective Reyes connected these historical dots, she began to uncover evidence suggesting that some of the key players in the current syndicate had direct ties to the old transit empire. This revelation added a chilling layer to the case. The corruption that had once been dismissed as relics of a bygone era had in fact been meticulously preserved and repackaged for modern times. With this new perspective, Reyes revisited old witness statements and re-examined archival documents that had long been overlooked. The trail led her to a reclusive figure, an elderly former executive of the defunct transit company, who had since become a recluse in the outskirts of Crestwood. In a tearful yet determined interview, he confessed that the culture of greed and secrecy had been instilled in him early on and passed down like a curse through successive generations of transit officials. His words, heavy with regret and resignation, provided a somber context for the modern-day abuses that had cost lives and eroded public trust. By now, the full scope of the conspiracy had been laid bare in the public eye, and the trial had become a watershed moment for Crestwood. The verdicts handed down in the courtroom were a testament to the tireless efforts of investigators like Detective Sabrina Reyes, whose perseverance had forced powerful figures into the light. Yet, even as the city celebrated a hard-won victory over corruption, Reyes knew that the battle was far from over. The encrypted files, the anonymous threats, and the lingering specter of Project Legacy served as constant reminders that those who seek to silence the truth rarely disappear completely. They merely change their names, their methods, and their faces. In the aftermath of the case, as reforms were enacted and a new era of transparency dawned over the Transit Authority, Detective Reyes continued to serve with quiet resolve. Every time she walked through the bustling halls of the Crestwood Transit Hub, now abuzz with the hopeful chatter of commuters and the steady rhythm of routine, she felt the weight of the past in every echo and every shadow. Julian Reyes's sacrifice, along with the countless victims of corruption and betrayal, remained etched in her memory, a solemn reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, must eventually be unearthed. For years afterward, the story of the Crestwood Transit Hub case was recounted in hushed tones by journalists, reformers, and even former insiders who had once been complicit in the network. It became a symbol of resistance, a testament to the idea that even in the darkest corners of our cities, where neon lights and the hum of machinery mask hidden sins, the courage to confront injustice can spark change. Detective Sabrina Reyes's tireless quest for truth, marred by personal sacrifice and the ever-present threat of those who lurked in the shadows, inspired a generation of investigators and activists determined to hold power accountable. And so, as Crestwood slowly emerged from a period of scandal and renewal, the legacy of that fateful night at the transit hub endured. In community meetings and late-night news broadcasts, citizens spoke of the case as a turning point, a moment when the veil of secrecy was torn away and the true cost of corruption was laid bare. The reforms that followed, though imperfect, marked the beginning of a new chapter in the city's governance, one in which transparency and accountability were not mere slogans, but principles to be upheld by every public servant. Detective Sabrina Reyes, though forever changed by the case, found solace in the knowledge that her efforts had made a difference. In her quiet moments, when the cacophony of the city receded and she was left alone with her thoughts, she would revisit the memories of that long night, the sight of Julian Reyes's lifeless form, the whispered confessions of desperate insiders, the cryptic clues that had led her on a perilous journey through the underbelly of power. Each memory was a reminder that the pursuit of truth was an endless endeavor, a mission that demanded unwavering commitment even when the odds seemed insurmountable. In the end, the Crestwood Transit Hub case was more than just a murder investigation or a tale of financial malfeasance. It was a mirror held up to society, reflecting the inherent struggle between integrity and corruption. It taught those who lived through it that the seemingly mundane routines of everyday life could hide depths of deception, and that even the most public institutions were vulnerable to the machinations of greed. The echoes of that dark night continued to reverberate through the corridors of Crestwood, a solemn promise that as long as there were brave souls willing to question, to dig deeper, and to demand accountability, the light of truth would eventually dispel the darkness. And so, as the city moved on, its skyline reshaped by both the scars and the triumphs of its past, the story of Julian Reyes and the relentless determination of Detective Sabrina Reyes became woven into the fabric of Crestwood's history. It was a story told not only in legal documents and media headlines, but also in the quiet resolve of ordinary citizens who had witnessed the transformation of their community. It was a reminder that even in a world where corruption sought to hide in plain sight, the courage to confront injustice could spark a revolution of transparency and hope. In that enduring spirit, the legacy of the case lived on, a beacon for future generations, a challenge to every power that dared to operate in secrecy. And as long as there were those willing to shine a light into the darkest corners, the promise remained that every secret, no matter how carefully buried, would one day be unearthed, and that justice, though it may come at a steep price, would ultimately prevail. The rain had subsided by the time the morning light crept over the sleepy town of Marigold Bend, a town that prided itself on its orderly streets and neighborly smiles, yet had always harbored secrets beneath its serene surface. At the heart of town stood the historic Harrington estate, once a symbol of opulence and civic pride, now marked by whispers of scandal and betrayal. It was here, in the dim study lined with dark wood and ancient books, that the body of Jonathan Harrington was discovered one crisp autumn morning. Jonathan, a respected philanthropist and the last scion of the once mighty Harrington family, had dedicated his later years to preserving the town's legacy. On that fateful morning, his lifeless form was found slumped over a desk cluttered with ledgers, letters, and personal mementos. A single red rose lay on the desk, next to his outstretched hand, and an unsigned note, its message scrawled in hurried script, rested atop a faded photograph. Some truths are best left uncovered. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. In the quiet hush of the estate, the only sound was the faint drip of water from a broken tap, a metronome marking the slow, inevitable march of time. Detective Marissa Cole arrived at the scene as a chill of foreboding swept through the grand foyer. Known for her intuitive grasp of human frailty and a relentless commitment to justice, Cole immediately sensed that Jonathan's death was no accident. She observed every detail with methodical precision, the angle of his body, the scattered papers that hinted at a frantic search for truth, and the unusual arrangement of family portraits along the wall. It was as if someone had staged the scene with deliberate care, a silent message left for those who might one day piece together the tangled web of the past. Interviews with household staff and close associates painted a portrait of a man who had in recent months grown increasingly isolated. His personal assistant, Evelyn Ross, recalled Jonathan's furtive glances and whispered phone conversations. He was always on edge, she confided, eyes downcast. He mentioned something about discrepancies in the family records, something that could tarnish our legacy. A longtime butler, Mr. Abbott, spoke of odd visitors in the dead of night and confidential meetings in the estate's rarely used library. Even distant relatives hinted at long-held grudges and family feuds that stretched back generations. It soon became apparent that Jonathan's pursuit of a long-buried secret, one he believed could expose the corruption and deceit that had festered within his family, had made him enemies both near and far. As Detective Cole sifted through Jonathan's personal effects, she discovered a set of meticulously kept diaries, filled with cryptic entries and numerical codes. One entry, dated only a week before his death, read, "The ledger does not lie, yet truth is hidden in numbers. When the dust settles, the past will converge with the present." This note, along with the scattered financial records and cryptic annotations, suggested that Jonathan had uncovered evidence of an elaborate embezzlement scheme that had drained the family fortune for decades, a scheme that not only implicated estranged relatives but also high-ranking town officials who had benefited from the Harrington legacy. The investigation soon revealed that Jonathan had been working on a project he called Project Veritas, a clandestine effort to trace the origins of a series of mysterious financial transfers recorded in the family's ancient ledgers. With the assistance of a forensic accountant, Detective Cole discovered that vast sums of money had been diverted over the years to offshore bank accounts under a series of shell companies. These funds were funneled through obscure transactions, amounts that were too precise, too deliberate to be mere clerical errors. The deeper she delved, the more Cole realized that this was no isolated case of mismanagement. Jonathan's records hinted at a network of corruption that extended beyond the boundaries of the estate, implicating business leaders and public officials in a conspiracy that had quietly undermined the town's prosperity. One brisk afternoon, as Cole reviewed digital copies of the family archives in the musty back room of the Harrington estate, she received an anonymous tip. A folded piece of paper, slipped under the door of her temporary office, bore only a series of numbers and the initials. Decoding the sequence required hours of painstaking work, but eventually the numbers corresponded to a series of dates and events, moments when large transactions had been recorded in the ledgers. Cross-referenced with public records, they pointed to a series of meetings at a once prominent bank now shuttered after a scandal. Appeared again and again, hidden in the margins of Jonathan's diary, suggesting the involvement of an individual whose identity was known to a select few in the highest echelons of power. In a quiet suburb of Marigold Bend, Detective Cole arranged a discreet meeting with a retired bank manager, Lawrence King, who had worked at the institution during its heyday. Over a pot of bitter coffee in his modest kitchen, King revealed that MK was the shorthand for Milton Kerr, a man who had been one of the bank's most influential executives before a sudden resignation shrouded in mystery. King's voice trembled as he recalled the day Kerr had disappeared, leaving behind whispers of scandal and speculation of his involvement in questionable financial dealings. He was smooth, charismatic, King murmured. But behind that charm, he was a man who would do anything to secure his power. I always suspected he was involved in siphoning money away from the bank, and I wouldn't be surprised if his name turned up in Jonathan's records. Armed with this new lead, Detective Cole expanded her inquiry into Milton Kerr's past. Public records confirmed that Kerr had maintained close ties with several members of Marigold Bend's elite council, individuals who had played key roles in securing public contracts and approving zoning changes that favored private development. Cole soon found herself entangled in a complex web of alliances and betrayals that reached back decades. The investigation unearthed emails, handwritten letters, and discreet phone calls between Kerr and a shadowy cabal of influential figures. It appeared that Kerr had masterminded a scheme that had funneled millions from public funds into private ventures, all while maintaining the facade of an upstanding financier. As the days turned to weeks, the evidence mounted, and Detective Cole felt the walls closing in on the conspirators. Yet, just as the case began to look like it would culminate in a series of high-profile arrests, an unexpected twist threw everything into doubt. A late-night call came from a young woman claiming to be a long-lost granddaughter of the Harrington family. Using only the pseudonym Clara, she insisted that she possessed additional documents that could exonerate several of the implicated public officials, and more shockingly, suggest that Jonathan's investigation might have been manipulated from within. Arrangements were made for a clandestine meeting at an abandoned train station on the outskirts of town, a place where time itself seemed to have stopped. Under the flickering light of a solitary lamp, Clara produced a bundle of yellowed papers and digital files on a battered USB drive. Her voice trembled as she recounted how, as a child, she had overheard hushed arguments and witnessed unexplained visits by strangers to the estate. They always spoke of preserving the family name, she whispered. But at what cost? I was told that the true legacy of the Harringtons was not in their wealth, but in the secrets they buried. Clara's revelations upended the entire narrative. The documents she produced indicated that Jonathan had not stumbled upon corruption by accident. He had been deliberately led down a false trail by individuals within the family who feared that exposing the full extent of the embezzlement would destroy not only the family's reputation, but also the very structure of local power. In her final note, Clara wrote, "My grandfather believed in redemption through truth, but sometimes truth is a weapon, and those who wield it risk not only their lives but the souls of everyone caught in its wake." Torn between the mounting evidence of systemic corruption and the possibility that the investigation had been hijacked by an internal faction seeking to cover their tracks, Detective Cole found herself at a crossroads. Her gut told her that Jonathan's murder had been the culmination of a long, deliberate campaign, a convergence of ambition, betrayal, and fear. Yet as she pored over the documents and re-examined witness testimonies, a new question emerged. Was justice truly the motive behind the orchestration of this murder, or was it simply an inevitable consequence of a legacy built on lies? In the ensuing weeks, as the local authorities prepared to indict several high-ranking officials and family members, the public reaction in Marigold Bend grew increasingly polarized. Protests erupted outside the town hall, while others lauded the Harrington name as a relic of a bygone era whose sins had been finally exposed. In the midst of the chaos, Detective Cole was left alone in her temporary office, surrounded by case files and the echo of her own doubts. The evidence, so meticulously gathered and yet so maddeningly ambiguous, pointed in conflicting directions. On one hand, there was a clear, undeniable trail of embezzlement and betrayal. On the other, the intervention of Clara, whose documents suggested that Jonathan's investigation had been tampered with, hinted at a deliberate manipulation designed not to serve justice, but to preserve a crumbling dynasty at any cost. One cold winter morning, as Cole sat reviewing the latest batch of forensic reports, she received a message on her secure phone, a single line of text reading, "The past is never dead." It was signed only with the initials MK. The message sent a shiver down her spine. Was it Milton Kerr, the once powerful executive now in hiding, or was it someone else, a ghost from the tangled history of the Harringtons, using Kerr's initials as a cipher to warn her? The ambiguity of the message left Detective Cole with more questions than answers. Instead of closure, the investigation had transformed into a labyrinth of contradictory leads and moral quandaries. Every new discovery only deepened the enigma. In the courtroom, as witnesses recounted their testimonies and prosecutors laid out a damning case, a palpable tension filled the air. The trial did not conclude with a dramatic denouement or a cathartic moment of vindication. Instead, it ended with a series of hushed verdicts and the quiet exodus of those who had long wielded power behind closed doors. The indicted were led away in silence, their faces inscrutable, while the spectators in the gallery sat in reflective stillness, as if the true outcome of the trial had yet to be written. Detective Cole returned to the Harrington estate one final time, a visit not for celebration, but for reckoning. In the decaying study, where Jonathan had met his end, she lingered over the scattered pages of his diary and the red rose now wilted on the desk. There was no triumphant sense of justice here, only an overwhelming awareness that some truths defied neat resolution. The carefully constructed facade of the Harrington legacy had been shattered, but in its broken shards lay questions that no verdict could answer. Were the conspiracies and betrayals the result of greed and corruption alone, or was there something more, a desperate attempt by a dying generation to rewrite history even as it crumbled around them? Standing amid the remnants of a once proud institution, Detective Cole realized that the case had not granted her the closure she had sought. Instead, it had exposed the murky interplay between memory, power, and the inexorable passage of time. As she left the estate, the rain began to fall again, not a cleansing torrent of redemption, but a soft, persistent drizzle that blurred the lines between past and present, truth and illusion. In that final moment, with the old mansion silhouetted against a gray sky, Detective Marissa Cole understood that some mysteries in Marigold Bend would forever remain unsolved, a convergence of shadows where every answer only begot new questions. There was no neat ending, no tidy epilogue to the tragic story of Jonathan Harrington. Instead, the case would live on as a quiet testament to the complexities of human ambition and the inescapable residue of secrets. And as Cole walked away into the chill morning, she carried with her not a sense of finality, but a wary acceptance that truth, like the rain, was both relentless and elusive, an ever-shifting mirage in a landscape where every light cast its own unique, and sometimes unanswerable, shadow. Under the gleam of a low-hanging moon, and the shimmer of city lights reflecting off polished marble, the Grand Regency Hotel stood as an icon of refined luxury, a bastion of opulence in a city that prided itself on its glamour and discretion. Every inch of the century-old building whispered tales of high-stakes deals and clandestine rendezvous. On one fateful autumn night, however, the elegant facade would be forever marred by an act of violence that would send shockwaves through the corridors of power and leave a trail of questions with no easy answers. It began shortly after midnight. In one of the upper-floor suites, a lavish haven reserved for the city's elite, a piercing scream shattered the silence. Hotel security, accustomed to the soft rustle of silk and the murmur of discreet conversations, scrambled to respond. In Suite 716, amidst richly patterned drapes and gilded furnishings, lay the lifeless body of Alexandra Montgomery, a renowned philanthropist and business magnate, whose influence stretched from boardrooms to charity galas. Her delicate features, once alight with determination and grace, were now frozen in a mask of shock. A deep, deliberate wound marred her temple, and a single bloodstain spread slowly over the pristine white sheets. Clutched in her trembling hand was a small folded note, its message scrawled in erratic handwriting. In silence, the truth is buried. Detective Clara Hastings arrived at the scene in the chill of the early morning. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for unearthing secrets hidden beneath layers of privilege, Hastings moved methodically through the suite. The room itself was a study in contrasts, sumptuous luxury marred by the raw horror of death. Hastings noted the absence of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no scattered belongings, only the stark finality of a life abruptly ended. The note in Alexandra's hand seemed out of place amidst the curated perfection of the suite, a final cry that begged to be deciphered. Over the next several hours, the investigation began to gather momentum. Hastings interviewed the distraught maid, who recalled hearing muffled voices and a sudden commotion just moments before the scream. A guest in the adjoining suite reported seeing a man in a dark overcoat slipping quickly down the corridor, as if evading detection. Meanwhile, forensic teams meticulously combed the room for evidence: a set of fingerprints on the bedside table, a torn piece of fabric caught on the antique lamp, and the distinct scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Each clue, though subtle, hinted that the murder had been premeditated, calculated to appear as though it might have been a random act of violence, yet too precise in its execution to be mere chance. Alexandra Montgomery was no stranger to controversy. Publicly celebrated for her charitable work and her groundbreaking business ventures, she had also been embroiled in a series of heated disputes with former partners and even estranged family members. In recent months, rumors had swirled about a hidden scandal, one that involved misappropriated funds, backroom deals, and an internal power struggle that threatened to tear apart her carefully constructed empire. Hastings learned from an assistant that Alexandra had been working on what she called Project Aurora, a confidential initiative aimed at restructuring a major philanthropic trust. The details of the project were tightly guarded, known only to a select inner circle, but whispers in elite social circles suggested that the project might expose financial irregularities and unethical practices that had been tolerated for far too long. As Hastings delved deeper into Alexandra's background, a tangled web of relationships and rivalries began to emerge. There was her estranged husband, Theodore Montgomery, a man known for his suave charm and discreet business acumen, yet whose public persona concealed deep-seated resentments. Then there was Victor Hale, a charismatic venture capitalist with a history of aggressive takeovers and a penchant for ruthlessness. Even a trusted senior advisor, Miranda Chen, whose years of service had earned her a quiet but influential position within the Montgomery circle, came under scrutiny after a series of leaked emails hinted at internal disagreements over the direction of Project Aurora. One clue in particular gnawed at Detective Hastings: the note found in Alexandra's hand. Its cryptic message, "In silence, the truth is buried," seemed to be a deliberate clue left by the victim in her final moments. Hastings enlisted the help of a handwriting analyst, who determined that while the note appeared hastily scrawled, certain letters bore the distinct flourish of someone trained in calligraphy, a style reminiscent of Miranda Chen's well-known signature. Yet Chen vehemently denied any involvement when questioned, asserting that her only loyalty had ever been to the Montgomery legacy. Amid the swirling suspicions, Hastings focused on the physical evidence. The torn fabric on the antique lamp was analyzed and matched to a designer suit sold exclusively to high-net-worth individuals. Surveillance footage from the hotel's ornate corridors captured a fleeting glimpse of a man matching that description, a man with a calm yet determined demeanor who seemed to know exactly where he was going. Further analysis of the fingerprints led to a surprising discovery. They did not belong to any of the known hotel staff or regular visitors. Instead, they were traced to a private security contractor recently hired by the hotel, a man named Daniel Reeves, whose background included a stint in corporate security and a reputation for resolving disputes in ways that were less than above board. Reeves became the focus of a new line of inquiry. His employment records showed that he had been recruited under unusual circumstances, his contract negotiated discreetly through channels that bypassed standard HR procedures. Colleagues described him as efficient, almost unnervingly so, and several recalled instances when he had been seen in restricted areas of the hotel without proper authorization. When confronted, Reeves maintained a stoic silence, offering only vague statements about doing his job and following orders. His evasiveness only deepened the mystery. Could it be that Reeves was acting on orders from someone within Alexandra's inner circle, or was he a pawn in a larger game, manipulated by forces determined to keep their secrets hidden? As the investigation unfolded, Detective Hastings began to piece together a narrative of corporate treachery and personal betrayal. Interviews with former employees of the Montgomery enterprise revealed that Alexandra had been a force of change, unafraid to challenge entrenched interests. Her project, Project Aurora, had promised to overhaul not only the financial practices of her philanthropic trust, but also to expose a decades-old system of corruption that had enriched a select few at the expense of many. One former CFO, now retired and living quietly in a suburb, recalled late-night meetings with Alexandra where she spoke passionately about purging the rot and restoring honor to the legacy. Yet the more the detective learned, the more she began to suspect that Alexandra's noble intentions had earned her enemies. Among those with a motive to silence her was Theodore Montgomery, whose bitter divorce from his wife had left him with nothing but bruised pride. There were also rival investors who had lost fortunes in deals orchestrated by Alexandra, and who might have seen her exposing their misdeeds as a threat to their own interests. A breakthrough came when Hastings received an anonymous tip delivered by a courier in a plain envelope that directed her to a secluded lounge bar in a nondescript part of the city. The envelope contained a series of photographs and digital transcripts. In one photo, a figure wearing a distinctive lapel pin was seen in the background of a private meeting at the Grand Regency. In the transcripts, voices could be heard discussing large sums of money, the reallocation of funds, and a phrase that repeatedly emerged, the silence clause. Hastings' instincts told her that this phrase referred to a clause in confidential contracts, agreements that allowed powerful figures to cover up financial misdeeds by paying off whistleblowers or, in extreme cases, eliminating those who dared to speak out. Armed with this new evidence, Detective Hastings turned her attention back to the hotel's records and discovered that a series of secret meetings had taken place in a private conference room on the top floor of the Grand Regency. Security logs showed that access to that room was granted only to a handful of individuals. Among them was Miranda Chen, whose earlier denials now seemed increasingly suspect, and Victor Hale, who had frequently visited the hotel under the guise of attending high-profile functions. Hastings secured a warrant to search the conference room, and what the forensic team uncovered inside was nothing short of damning. Hidden within a locked safe were stacks of documents detailing offshore bank transfers, forged contracts, and a list of names that spanned influential figures in both business and government. At the bottom of the file lay a single document, a contract drafted in precise legal language that explicitly mentioned a silence clause, a clause that, if triggered, would absolve the signatories of any liability in exchange for a substantial sum of money, and implicitly, the permanent removal of any dissenters. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. It became clear that Alexandra Montgomery's murder was not a random act of violence or the result of a personal vendetta. It was the calculated termination of a woman who had become too dangerous to the entrenched powers, benefiting from a system built on corruption. As Detective Hastings prepared to confront the remaining suspects, she faced mounting pressure from her superiors and from the media, which had caught wind of the scandal and was eager for answers. In a tense confrontation arranged in the hushed back office of the Grand Regency, Hastings brought together several of the key figures implicated by the evidence. Theodore Montgomery was the first to be questioned, a man whose once charming demeanor had now withered into a grimace of anger and regret. In a heated exchange, he admitted that he had opposed Alexandra's radical reforms but vehemently denied any involvement in her death. "I may have disagreed with her methods," he spat, "but I would never stoop to murder. My pain is my own, and I have nothing to do with this charade." His words, though bitter, did little to dispel the suspicion that had been building around him. Next to be confronted was Victor Hale, whose cool confidence was now undermined by mounting evidence. Under the unyielding gaze of Detective Hastings and the relentless pressure of forensic records, Hale finally broke. In a measured, almost detached tone, he confessed that he had been part of a series of secret meetings aimed at restructuring the financial empire that Alexandra was attempting to overhaul. "There are things in this world," he said, his voice devoid of remorse, "that are best kept quiet. Alexandra threatened to expose us all, and we were forced to take measures to protect our interests." His confession was carefully worded to avoid directly admitting to murder, but it was clear that his involvement extended far deeper than mere financial manipulation. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Miranda Chen. In a private interview, Chen's once calm facade shattered under the weight of evidence. "I was blinded by loyalty," she admitted, tears glistening in her eyes. "Alexandra was my mentor, but her methods, her recklessness, put everything at risk. When she threatened to reveal the truth about our dealings, I felt cornered. I never imagined that it would come to this, but when the contract was signed and the silence clause was invoked, I knew there was no turning back." Chen's confession painted a tragic portrait of a woman torn between her ideals and the pressures exerted by a powerful syndicate, a revelation that added a deeply personal dimension to the case. With the confessions of Hale and Chen, and the mounting physical evidence linking private security contractor Daniel Reeves to the crime scene, Detective Hastings felt that the final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Reeves, when confronted with irrefutable forensic evidence, offered a curt explanation: "I was following orders. I was never the one who pulled the trigger." His cryptic remark left an unsettling impression. It suggested that the true mastermind was still at large, orchestrating events from behind a veil of anonymity. In the weeks that followed, as the trial of the implicated conspirators unfolded amidst intense public scrutiny, the city of Larchmont, where the Grand Regency stood, found itself at a crossroads. Headlines blared of corporate treachery, betrayal, and a high society murder that shook the foundations of the local elite. Yet even as convictions were handed down and sentences imposed, Detective Hastings remained unsatisfied. The mystery of Alexandra Montgomery's final moments, the identity of the shadowy figure who had orchestrated the silence clause, and the role of Daniel Reeves as the fall guy all continued to haunt her. One chilly evening, as Hastings reviewed case files in the quiet solitude of her modest office, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A courier handed her an unmarked envelope. Inside she found a single sheet of paper. This time its message was terse, almost clinical: "The truth is never complete." No signature, no date, just those words. For Hastings, it was as if the envelope had been sent by the very hand of fate, a final, ambiguous statement from someone who remained in the shadows of the conspiracy. Unlike previous cases where the trail of evidence eventually led to a neat conclusion, Alexandra Montgomery's murder refused to yield a definitive ending. In the courtroom, the testimonies and confessions had revealed the extent of corruption within the inner circles of power. But they also raised a disquieting possibility that the system was so deeply entrenched in secrecy and self-preservation that even the strongest legal verdicts might fail to erase its legacy. The judge's gavel fell, sealing the fate of several high-ranking officials and private operatives, but Detective Hastings could not shake the feeling that a crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing. Late one rainy night, as she walked the neon-lit streets of Larchmont, Hastings recalled a conversation with Miranda Chen. A final exchange in which Chen had murmured, "Some voices, once silenced, echo forever." Those words reverberated in Hastings' mind as she stared into a puddle reflecting the fractured city skyline. It was in that moment that she realized the investigation had become more than a quest for justice. It had evolved into a meditation on the nature of truth itself. Alexandra's death, with its carefully planted clues and calculated omissions, was not meant to resolve neatly. Instead, it was a testament to the enduring complexity of human ambition, a puzzle that would continue to generate questions even as answers were forced into place by the rigors of the legal system. In the end, while the trial produced convictions and the public demanded reform, the legacy of the case lingered in quiet moments: a look exchanged between a disillusioned banker, a whispered warning in a smoky lounge, or the furtive glances of those who once inhabited the inner sanctums of power. Detective Clara Hastings, now marked by the long and winding investigation, came to understand that some mysteries are not resolved by a single verdict or the closure of a courtroom door. Instead, they persist like the fading echo of a half-remembered song, a reminder that in the interplay between secrecy and revelation, truth remains an elusive, ever-changing mosaic. In the months that followed, as Larchmont slowly adapted to its newfound reputation for scandal and intrigue, Hastings continued her work with a tempered resolve. She rarely spoke of the case in public, but in the quiet moments of reflection, she would pore over the evidence and the unsent letters that had arrived over time, cryptic messages that hinted at further layers of corruption yet to be uncovered. One such letter, received on a bleak winter morning, simply read, "Some mysteries endure beyond our grasp." Rather than see this as a failure, Hastings regarded it as an enduring challenge, a call to keep questioning, to keep looking beyond the surface of even the most damning evidence. Thus, the murder of Alexandra Montgomery came to symbolize not a final neat conclusion, but rather a crossroads of human frailty and institutional rot. The Grand Regency, once a beacon of glamour, now stood as a monument to the complexity of truth, a reminder that sometimes the hardest cases are not those that can be solved, but those that leave you with an ever-growing list of questions. For Detective Hastings, the case was a lifelong burden and a perpetual reminder that in the labyrinth of power, every answer can give birth to new enigmas. And so, as she locked up her office for the night, and stepped out into the city's rain-washed streets, she carried with her the unsettling realization that while justice might claim victory in the courts, the human heart and the machinations of power would forever remain, in many ways, an unsolvable riddle.